And a very good morning and welcome to Powering Up the North. My name's Henry Murison. I'm the Director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership and I'll be your chair today. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I'll give a very quick kind of introduction before we get into our first presentations and speakers. So the purpose of today is to focus on the bigger picture and wider importance of the North's role in the UK's energy destiny. We've got a huge role to play because of our existing assets, but also because of our key role in some of the emerging technologies and opportunities, as well as the skills of our workforce in so many of these key industries. We are seeking to achieve net zero by 2050 or sooner in many parts of the Northwest, and that provides a huge opportunity for us to provide national but also global leadership in the adoption of some of the key technologies which will play a role around the world. So the green recovery that we need after COVID-19 is very much here in the Northwest, and it's why I'm so glad we've got the panel and all of you in the audience here to discuss some of the key challenges and issues. I particularly wanted to first introduce our speakers before we get into our actual first panel, but just to run through the timings, you'll see we have an opening address from Peter from Electricity Northwest shortly. We'll then go into our first panel, which I'm going to introduce now. The first panel will be led by Trudy Harrison, MP, the Member of Parliament for Copeland, and the second panel will be led by Lucy Powell. We're also delighted that Jonathan Brearley, the CEO of Offshore, will also be here with us to join us for today. So to get into this first of our two panel sessions, you'll be seeing in the kind of next few moments the kind of key issues that we want to cover. But in terms of the particular speakers for that session, as well as Trudy, we also are joined by Professor Keith Bell from the Committee on Climate Change, Tony Lloyd MP, the MP for Rochdale and the former and the only ever interim mayor for Greater Manchester, Emma Degg, my colleague, the Chief Executive from the Northwest Business Leadership Team, and Mark Atherton from the Combined Authority in Greater Manchester. And we also will be hearing, as you're going to guess, from a number of voices from across the Electricity Northwest distribution area, so from Cumbria, from Lancashire, and from Greater Manchester throughout this morning. So in terms of that first panel session, the key theme is how can the Northwest lead the way on achieving net zero and in the medium to short term, in the kind of wrong order, the green recovery from the current economic challenges that I know we're experiencing, will experience more intensely in the coming few weeks and months. I think there's a particular opportunity to focus on how we not only set targets, but turn that into real action on the ground, what the specific challenges are around a just transition, so some of the issues for some of those from the most disadvantaged communities, and also some of the opportunities around devolved energy agreements, which obviously Ofgem have published some very interesting suggestions on as part of their ED2 kind of frameworks. And I think it's so important that those opportunities for collaboration between our combined authorities, wider public sector partners in local government, and our energy distribution companies are there. So our DNOs are key parts of the energy transition pathway for local communities, and people can work in much closer collaboration with the local partners that they have. So I'm just going to quickly run through some housekeeping, and then that'll be all from me. We'd ask that you can be aware that this is recorded and we will be sharing parts of this online. If you are tweeting, we ask you to use the Powering Up the North hashtag and tag Electricity Northwest's Twitter feed, which you should be seeing now on your screens, as well as Devo Connect to continue the debate online. You can also use the chat function to share opinions and comments that I'll try and draw in and draw you into the discussion. If you are asking a question, please type the name before that person, before the question of the person you want it addressed to, and I'll make sure I do that on your behalf when we get into the Q&A. And if you want to ask panelists a live question or join the discussion, please either use the chat or raise your hand, and I'll try and bring in as many people as I can. We have got a phenomenal group of people joining us as attendees today, so I will try and bring as many of you in as I can, but obviously do be aware that we've only got a couple of hours, so we will be keeping contributions as tight and as to the point as possible. So if I do bring you in, please do ask a question or make a comment rather than give a speech. But I'm sure it would be a very interesting speech, but we just don't sadly have the time to bring all of those in. After the first session, after the first panel, there will be a short ad break. So we've got a small videos to share, which will give people a slight comfort break if you do need to, but I would encourage you, if you can, to stay and enjoy the video, the short video. And then there will also be a poll that will ask people across the audience to complete at that point as well. So do keep an eye out for the poll. So in the style of kind of online events, as we now are all used to, it gives me great pleasure to digitally introduce Peter Emery, Chief Executive Electricity North West, obviously a well-known figure to many of you. And I'm really glad and appreciate Peter in making the time available, but also working with his colleagues to facilitate this opportunity for us to have this dialogue. Clearly, as a DNO, ENW has a particular role as a convener throughout the year and in all the discussions we have about the energy transition. And today, I suppose, is a good example of how that convening power can bring together lots of different key stakeholders from the world of local government politics and also industry to collaborate together in the interests of achieving decarbonisation in the northwest of England. So Peter, really appreciate you being with us and look forward to hearing your remarks.
Okay, thanks Henry, and welcome everyone. The Northwest makes a significant contribution to the UK energy supply. We're already extremely well placed with renewables and the nuclear industry and other more conventional generation. And we're also potentially got a potential to make a contribution in hydrogen. So from an energy perspective, the Northwest region is in a very good place to be able to show a leadership role. And I think that's what today is all about. We're looking to explore that, how we can exploit that, not only to decarbonise quicker, but also to make a real contribution to building the economy back better and quicker. So I think the COVID-19 pandemic has been challenging, and it's been a difficult time for all of us. The recovery is underway, but it's going to be perhaps even more challenging. I think that's becoming pretty clear. I think we need to recalibrate our priorities. And in our view, our focus on the environment and energy must take centre stage as we strive to decarbonise our lives and our businesses. And I think given the clear economic imperative that we can all see in front of us to get the economy moving, there's a real opportunity to accelerate our plans and our investment in the decarbonisation journey. Electricity Northwest, we can play a leading role in this recovery and to the Build Back Better agenda. And I thought I'd start a little bit in sort of explaining what we're doing, just to paint the picture that we're currently involved with. There's no doubt we are trying our best to lead the way with Cumbria, Lancashire and Greater Manchester on their ambitions to carbonise and provide a supporting role and provide technical expertise and input to local decision makers to help them meet their targets as soon as possible. And they are challenging targets. So in the short run, there are three things that we're doing. Over the next 3 years, we've already announced that we're investing 25 million in strategic projects across the region. But from the Samlesbury Enterprise Zone near Preston to central Manchester and elsewhere, that work is underway now. The second area that we're focusing on is to ensure that there's enough capacity in the network so that we can accommodate the low carbon transition. That is a challenge today, and at the moment our network is not constrained. But I think as the debate goes forward today, one of the major challenges we have is how do we stay ahead of that curve? How do we ensure that critical infrastructure that the network provides is not a barrier to the transition and does not halt progress? That's the second area we've made a commitment to deliver on. And the third is to work more closely with local partners and stakeholders. And today is part of that effort. What we found over the last 2 years is that the closer we engage with stakeholders to develop a greater understanding, the easier it then is to collaborate, and the more quickly we can make progress. And I think over the last 12 to 18 months in particular, the work we've done on looking at future energy scenarios, and then developing our response with the carbon pathways work that we've pioneered with Cadent in the area, really shows that there's the understanding of what people's aspirations and needs are, coupled with the infrastructure requirements to support those. We're making great progress. But we're still at an early stage, but we've got to start with a plan where everybody's bought into it. So today's understanding, I think, goes on to build further understanding and encourage more collaboration, and should demonstrate, and hopefully at the end of it, we'll have a clear pathway as to how the Northwest can lead, not only in green innovation, but also development of skills and jobs. I'm delighted that we've been able to bring together Northwest energy suppliers and providers with political and business leaders across the Northwest, as well as national speakers. I'm particularly pleased to welcome Trudy Harrison, Lucy Powell, and Jonathan Brearley. So we want our plans for the future. We want our plans for the future to support and protect our customers. Now's a critical time for the electricity networks. Many of you will know we're on the build-up towards the next price control, RIIO-ED2, which starts in 2023 and will run to 2028. So we're now developing the plans for that. So decisions and input and investment plans that we put together in the next 12 to 18 months will have a profound impact on our work out to 2028. These plans will detail the investment that our customers and stakeholders want us to make. That is our intention. And by the end of this period, by 2028, there'll only be 10 years left before Greater Manchester's decarbonisation target of 2038. So it's important we get this right. And I think it's fair to say we're embarking now on the most detailed and largest stakeholder engagement activity that the business has ever engaged in. And rightly so. Now is a critical time. So in this context, I think it's important to talk about why we in the Northwest have the potential to provide impetus for the green energy and net zero innovation. And today, the Powering Up North will ask some very important big questions so we can plan for the future. So I've given you some idea what our role is. But there are 4 big questions really that are on my mind and my team's mind as we start to develop our plans for ED2. And these are in terms of the challenges that we need to tackle together and the opportunities ahead. And I'd appreciate your input and support on them. So there are really 4 questions that are going to have a profound impact on our plans. The first one is to do with electric vehicles. How quickly can we transition to electric vehicles? The government has recently announced its target of 2035 to ban the sale of petrol and diesel cars, which is welcome. That's been brought forward. Some could argue it could be brought forward sooner. I know the Climate Change Committee have encouraged the government to be more ambitious. 2035 for some does not seem like a response to a climate emergency. But whatever the number turns out to be, it's going to have a profound effect on our network. So we need to have some understanding what the government's policy is going to be, how aggressive they're going to be with decarbonising electric vehicles, so that we can make sure that our investment plans can stay ahead of that growth in demand as electric vehicles are rolled out. So that's the first area we are very interested in. To context that, the full rollout of electric vehicles, we estimate it will double the demand for electricity and double the peak demand. So that's an important fact to bear in mind. The second area is all about heat. What's the government's position on hydrogen? What's the government's position on nuclear? not only from in terms of electrical generation, but more parochially, there's opportunity for more nuclear generation in Cumbria. That is also very important to our infrastructure requirements. Decarbonised heat, blue and green hydrogen can be a major source of heat. What impact will hydrogen have on our future plans and the future of our network? This is a big question. If all of heat was electrified, that would increase electricity demand by 5 times the current demand. And even with energy efficiency, it could be between 3 and 5 times. So context that with the challenge of electric vehicles, which just doubles it, it just shows the size of the heat challenge. So the question for us is, what's the government position in both these areas? What does that mean for our infrastructure plans? Do they want to go down both paths? If that's the case, then we can plan accordingly. But at the moment, we have no clarity in that area, and that could be very important to us. The third area is distributed generation, such as solar and wind, and many of which, well, all of which, the distributed generation connects to our network. So one of the discussions we've had with the combined authority about the 2038 target is if you're going to expect to get to zero carbon by 2038, you need a lot more distributed generation. And so the big question is, how can businesses and customers be encouraged to invest in it? And there is a major issue because when people invest in their property and improve it, then business rates go up. So at the moment, there is an unwelcome consequence of investing in distributed generation in your business means your rates go up, which doesn't help the incentives. Our research shows that businesses are being put off installing solar because of this issue with business rates. This clearly doesn't encourage installation, but local renewable generation will be key to net zero, as I've just described. So what can be done to help incentivize initially business customers, but also domestic customers that want to do this? The focus on business, I think, is important. Business represents nearly 60% of our demand, and therefore, if we're going to make real progress in this area, then businesses have got to find it an attractive proposition. And the fourth question that we need to understand is about energy efficiency. Everyone on this call, I'm sure, will be aware that the best way to reduce carbon is to use less energy. And the best way to do that is through energy efficiency in buildings and operations. What I'd like to know is what more the government and local regional leaders can do, and business leaders, to encourage more energy efficiency and make better use of the energy that we provide through our network. The more energy efficient we are, then the less we'll have to invest in infrastructure. The less we'll have to invest in infrastructure, the lower the price will be for the consumer, which is an important consideration for us. One of the other characteristics of the Northwest is we have some of the highest rates of fuel poverty and vulnerable customers in the country, and therefore affordability is very important. So anything we can do in energy efficiency that reduces the need for infrastructure has got to be good news for customers. So those are the points I'd like to make in starting off today's session. I look forward to hearing what our panels think about some of these big questions. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank everyone for being here today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what people have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. A real pleasure to hear from you as always. And it just falls to me to ask our next panel to virtually join us, as is now the common way in these Zoom events. So I think it was really interesting that Peter's been able to sort of set the tone for this session, which will focus on those key questions of how the Northwest can lead the way on net zero and the green recovery, as I mentioned earlier. So how can the Northwest accelerate the low carbon ambitions, ensure energy security and guarantee a fair price, particularly that just transition? We don't want to see all the costs falling on the most vulnerable and the early benefits falling on those who have the broader shoulders. We need to find ways to avoid that. And what are the challenges, particularly if we want to meet those targets that have been set at a city region level? Obviously, Greater Manchester have a particular target. I know there's a lively debate in Cumbria about what their ambitions should be. And I think that reflects the differing local priorities and the particular issues and local factors that also drive what people's ambitions are for their decarbonisation pathways, which actually do differ in different localities, which is why our panels today really do represent the full range of both the geographic and the wider experts and stakeholders we've got that will all play a big role in the transition we all need to make around the decarbonisation pathway. So I'm going to give each panelist just 2 or 3 minutes to quickly give their thoughts in response to Peter, both to the kind of question challenge, but also some of the really interesting ideas, and particularly obviously get their views on the challenges that we need to look at in order to address and also to move and respond to. I think particularly I was going to ask Trudy, as one of our parliamentarians with us today, to give her initial reflections. Clearly, Trudy is steeped in the nuclear industry, being from West Cumbria, an industry that I'm also a well-known and great advocate of. So we have much that we agree about, but I'm sure we won't all agree too much today. We might find some things to disagree about. But I wanted to first welcome Trudy to join us now and give some of her thoughts, particularly with all the great work she's done in championing the nuclear industry in West Cumbria in Parliament, and in her new role, of course, as PPS to the Prime Minister, all she does to keep these issues at the top of the government's agenda behind the scenes as well.
Thank you very much, Henry. And yes, steeped in nuclear history and very much the nuclear nuisance in Parliament is what I'm very proud to be. And now in number 10. Thank you also to Peter Emery there for referencing Cumbria's esteemed, recognition and place in the world of nuclear. I think it is really important actually to just quickly reflect on why we call ourselves the Centre of Nuclear Excellence with such credibility. It is, of course, because it's where it started at Calder Hall, but we have designed, commissioned, built out, operated and decommissioned 7 reactors in and around the Sellafield site. So the fact that we have done all that, gone right through, the circle of life of nuclear reactors, puts us in a very strong position, and it is surely the most sensible place. If you're wanting to build first-of-a-kind technology, whether that's advanced modular reactors or small modular reactors, I advocate that you want to do it in a community where you've got the vast majority of nuclear expertise, where we have something in the order of 25,000 nuclear workers of the 80-something thousand nuclear workers in the country. It is that heritage and history, it's the industrial knowledge, and it's also the community that overwhelmingly, certainly on the West Coast, understands and supports nuclear and atomic energy. I think looking forward, we are particularly excited about the UK SMR consortium and the potential for a 440 megawatt small modular reactor being located perhaps on the Fell side, but certainly around the Sellafield site. But because of the vast land mass available, we're also very excited about the EDF proposal to locate 2 HPR reactors and the co-location of hydrogen as well, because the two go so well together. We're also bearing in mind the research and development capability that we have at the National Nuclear Laboratory, the hot boxes, the waste that is currently stored at Sellafield and cold waste, which most in the industry would say actually is an asset. So the potential there to turn waste into energy with, whether that's a CANDU reactor or the 4th generation reactors that can be trialed in those protective hot boxes using what we have stored at Sellafield, vast stocks of plutonium, and then really that circle of life being concluded with the waste management that we have great experience of, not just in this country, but also exporting our expertise, our components across the globe. So that is why I advocate and talk constantly up the nuclear industry and want to see it further developed in Copeland. Coming on to the challenges very briefly, essentially my number 1 challenge is the lack of a nuclear development authority, agency, whatever it may be, the programme management, which actually understands the true capability that this country has, but also the need for electricity and energy. The Nuclear Industry Association have estimated a requirement for 415 terawatt hours of energy by 2050, and they recommend that 40% of that should be generated through nuclear. So mapping that out in a kind of GIS style technology, understanding where the capability is, the national nuclear sites, and also where the infrastructure will need to be. It's long term, and one of the challenges is the short termness of Parliament and politics. So that's certainly probably the biggest challenge I have, forecasting, because it is such a long game. We eagerly anticipate the Energy White Paper, but I think far more interestingly, I'm looking forward to the siting policy and the financial models for the various different reactors and components and stages of the civil nuclear energy forecast. That's probably enough from me. Henry, thank you very much.
Thank you, Trudy. And next I'm going to ask Professor Keith Bell from the Committee on Climate Change to give us a sort of a wider national view. And obviously, Peter quite rightly referenced the need for greater policy certainty from government. And I think that hopefully we will get that in the Energy White Paper, because obviously getting that clarity on the decarbonisation transition and the level of ambition, because clearly a 2050 target definitely specifies the need, for instance, for nuclear, but sometimes the scenarios have driven policy, and those like the National Infrastructure Commission have perhaps jumped to early conclusions about why some technologies may or may not be needed because of a lack of ambition. I think there's certainly no lack of ambition now, and obviously how the work of those who advise us is turned into policy by government is critical, but understanding what the emerging evidence base is and what's happening in the debates about how we best achieve decarbonisation is vital for this debate. So we're particularly glad you're with us today, Keith.
Yeah, thanks very much. I might leave the question of what you might call firm generation technologies are the right ones, or what the right mix is, to the discussion section. But I would maybe first pick up, Peter was talking to us as the CEO of an owner of a major infrastructure facility that it isn't an end in itself, but like the gas networks, electricity transmission, local heat networks, future CO2 pipelines, fiber networks is a key enabler of other things, and competition has a part to play in keeping the cost of all that down. We've talked already, I mentioned, affordability is extremely important, but the networks are not the same quite as you would find in an open market for a commodity. Therefore, depends a lot on regulation. And I see that Jonathan Brearley of Offshore is going to be speaking to us later, so that's really welcome. One thing that's always been difficult, I think, in energy network regulation has been uncertainty. And Trudy talked about uncertainty just there as well. Will particular investments really be needed? There's a risk of stranded assets, yep, but there's also risks in not making timely and sufficient investments. And there are questions about where the costs fall. There's a difficult but important challenge, I think, of articulating price signals that encourage network users to make best use of the network capacity that's there, and to make sure that the costs of upgrades are shared among those who benefit from them, that we avoid negative impacts, especially on those who can afford the overall cost of energy the least. However, one thing, as Henry was touching on there, should not be uncertain, and that is the need for the UK's greenhouse gas emissions to be reduced to net zero by 2050. That needs a lot of action in a lot of spheres, most particularly in respect of energy, our topic for today, and as Peter was touching on, in decarbonising heat and transport. Now, I would say that EVs are not the only topic in respect of mobility. Just the need for mobility and alternatives to cars are a big part of it. Coming out of the COVID crisis, there's a need to rebuild confidence in public transport. But EVs do present obvious challenges to power network operators. But at the same time, that cars, if EVs behave in the same way as combustion engine vehicles, on average spend 95% of their time parked. So if they're plugged in, they ought to offer a lot of flexibility in terms of when they're charged. And for that reason, I'm not sure that electricity demand should double as a consequence of electric vehicle growth. Decarbonisation of heat, I think, is going to be, although it's a big challenge in accommodating EVs, heat is going to be even more difficult. We would expect a lot of existing gas heating to be transferred to electricity, and that offers some benefits in terms of heat pumps, where the coefficient of performance gives you, value of 2 or 3, so there's less energy used to achieve the same outcome. The challenge, I think, is that there's less diversity in demand than there is in demand for heat than there is in demand for other sorts of things. But there are also alternatives to electrification, especially for heavy industry, notably in terms of blue or green hydrogen, which also seem necessary for heavy transport in future. But in densely populated areas, parts of Greater Manchester, let's say, efficiencies can come from heat networks, provided there is a low carbon source of heat. A heat network isn't a solution in itself if all it's going to do is use unabated burning of gas. Now, in respect of electricity distribution, especially for urban areas and for lower voltages, the CCC has said that given the high proportion of costs due to civil works, once the reinforcement gets triggered, we should make the electrical capacity future-proof, both to avoid the need to do it again before 2050 and to minimise the long-term cost of electrical losses. Now, just to sort of broaden out the discussion a little bit, I think, before I use up my time, there are major challenges, of course, in decarbonising energy use in buildings. We've touched on energy efficiency. It'd be nice to think of all those jobs that Magtopia has brought, also being concerned with efficiency in those buildings. I'm not sure how many of the architects had the efficiency of those buildings and low carbon sources of energy very high up their agenda. Energy efficient buildings, particularly with heat storage, offer flexibility in terms of the timing of import of energy, and that can help to limit the need for network reinforcement. But there's a comparison here with heat networks and with gas networks that offer similar flexibility. But these sorts of things need coherent local planning. I think that is essential. Particular investments, e.g. in heat networks, make sense only if you achieve a certain scale of demand, reach that threshold so that the costs can be shared among a number of users. I know various local authorities around Greater Manchester have been doing work in that direction, plans at different stages of development. A green recovery now, I think, if fully backed by central government, would seem to give those plans, especially the most mature ones, opportunities to move forward towards implementation. And there are important industrial clusters as well around South Lancashire in particular, with opportunities for hydrogen anchor loads around that. So just to conclude, the question in any scenario planning around this and making use of these potential clusters is, what can be achieved in terms of local or regional planning? Can they identify the right or at least the least regret path for any particular area, given its particular characteristics? And who are the right parties to lead such planning? Do they have the right resources and expertise? And can they carry all the other key actors along with them in coming up with a plan for that area? Now, the CCC will be saying more in our advice on the 6th carbon budget on various of these questions, and that's due for publication in December. So please do look out for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. And next, I'm going to invite one of our representatives on the panel from Magtopia, Mark Atherton, who's Director of the Environment at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, to give us some reflections from what was the first of our combined authorities in the north, but obviously probably the most advanced in terms of the devolution framework of the areas covered by ENW. But obviously, I know particularly Trudy's very keen that certainly in Cumbria we emulate some of the benefits that come from those local devolved structures, particularly as it comes to energy policy, because obviously in GM there are particular levers and tools that Mark and his colleagues have that I think are really, particularly when you take them together with the collaboration that's being developed with Cadence and ENW, are very powerful in terms of being able to work towards some of the shared goals I know that exist and that are in the interests of residents and also the business community.
Morning, thank you for the introduction. Always difficult to follow on from other speakers because we're in danger of violently agreeing with each other. So I'll try and pick up where Keith left off, if I may. I think Peter's introduction was absolutely right. We're asked to focus on challenges, and certainly we've done quite a lot of modelling in Greater Manchester over the last 2 years to better understand what getting to carbon neutral by 2038 actually entails. And Peter's absolutely right that the biggest challenges are around decarbonising heat and decarbonising transport. And as other speakers have said, there are a number of different ways that we can do that. But the point we're at now is to understand the most cost-effective way and the ways that are most likely to be acceptable to consumers, because that's the way that we'll get transformation at scale that we need. So the 3 points that I'm going to talk about in the next couple of minutes are, one is the need for innovation. We know that existing technology will not get us to where we need to be. We know that innovation is still required. I'll talk a little bit about that. We need to talk about how do we accelerate decarbonisation as quickly as possible, because in Greater Manchester we have a final carbon budget of 91 million tonnes of carbon that we have left to emit ever. And the longer we take to bring down our current emissions, the more challenging meeting that carbon budget will be. So it's about how do we accelerate and look at decarbonisation in the next 5 years, because after that it becomes really, really challenging to make our targets match. And the third, and probably my final point, which brings all of those together, is about local planning and local delivery, which I think is where Keith was heading. So let me start off with the innovation piece. In terms of innovation, I think that we need to do two things. There are existing technologies which are not being deployed as quickly as possible, and we're not making the best use of best-in-class technologies that are prevalent in other parts of the world and in other parts of the UK. We're also not stimulating, in my opinion, enough local businesses to innovate their products, goods and services. So we need something, a vehicle, working potentially with our universities in Greater Manchester to ensure that businesses are innovating, obviously creating an opportunity for themselves in what is going to be a broadening market, but also that we're looking across the globe to bring in best of class technology and look to see whether we can create next generation technologies out of that, or processes. So I think there's a vehicle required to accelerate innovation. Secondly, I think in terms of rapid decarbonisation, we do need to think about how we go about accelerating, and you almost need to break down the technology types, the key technology types, into their component parts. So public buildings have completely different levers to domestic buildings that have completely different levers to commercial buildings. And we need to understand what the levers are for each of those and understand what we need to do to pull those levers to accelerate deployment of low carbon technologies, increase energy efficiency, and link in with the digital revolution that's happening. Same with energy generation technologies. It will vary across the whole of the Northwest. We are fortunate as a region to have a plethora of different energy generation technologies available to us. In Greater Manchester, we are limited in some ways to PV and localized heat generation. But onshore wind, nuclear has already been mentioned, and even hydro, tidal are all opportunities for us. And my final point is that to bring this all together, we do need to stop thinking about infrastructure in silos. What's become very clear in the last few years is that to get to carbon neutral by 2038, we need to look at how we invest in infrastructure across the piece, whether that's energy infrastructure, built infrastructure, transport infrastructure, to understand the interrelationships between those different infrastructure types. Because it's by understanding how those things interrelate and how you can get economies of scale through the interrelationship of energy efficiency and energy generation measures. As Keith started to allude to, energy storage, I think, will become an important factor in this in terms of allowing the grid to balance. It's those issues that we need to get better at. So my final point would be, we've made great progress working with ENW and Cadent, and we've started some discussions with Ofgem about local area environment plans, energy plans, I should say. And over the next 2 years, we'll be developing local area energy plans for the 10 districts of Greater Manchester, because it's at that sort of level we believe that you'll get the level of detail that is required to overcome some of these complex issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we'll now get to our next panelist. So we've got Emma Degg, who's Chief Executive of the Northwest Business Leadership Team.
Thank you very much, Henry. And yes, it's always interesting following other people. So if it's okay, I probably violently agree with most of that, but I'll focus just on 3 things if I can. So first of all, the industrial demand side of the equation. Secondly, where I think we're already beginning to do some things. And third, arse of government. So thank you very much for being here, Trudy. So if you can take any messages back, that would be lovely. So first of all, Henry, you were right to open up with, this is an opportunity and a challenge for the North, but actually this is an issue for the country, because the country doesn't get to where it wants to get to if we don't do what we need to do here. Northwest alone has the highest concentration of advanced manufacturing and chemicals in the whole of the UK. So if we don't sort this out, we don't get to 2050. Investable projects that we have today, which are ready to go, would save over 10 million tonnes of that carbon in terms of chemical process and advanced manufacturing. Perhaps even more crucially at the moment, those are critical industries. We know that through COVID. Chemical production, I think, has risen up everybody's agendas over the last 6 months. I know that this isn't your patch, Peter, but I know you're also always geographically generous. So having a discussion with Cheshire and Warrington yesterday, 125,000 people are still furloughed in the sub-region, 75% increase in universal credit claimants, and we have a lot of graduates who are going to be looking for skilled work. Those projects I referred to before could create 33,000 new jobs, as well as safeguarding those industries. And this isn't about innovation. So some of it is, but actually more crucially, it's about deployment and diffusion of those technologies, really. I really do commend both Electricity Northwest and Cadent for the work that they have been doing in terms of bringing that industry collaboration together, working with Mark's team. We've been working across the Northwest on the roadmap to zero carbon, which will be published next week, and have a bid into government for the next phase. We've also got a number of our anchor industries who've come together to put some investment into actually taking investable propositions to market. So we know some of this we need to do ourselves, and I think that the Northwest and the North are really well placed to do that. But what do we need from government? Number one, if this is a climate emergency, then we do need to get on with it now. Really welcome the forthcoming Energy White Paper, but we'd really like it to be around for a long time. Actually, consistency and a long-term policy is as important, really, as trying to find exactly the right mix. Please, can we not let the perfect be the enemy of the good? You know, we don't know the answer to all of these things, but we know what some of it is, so let's get on and do that. Really interesting. A number of our projects reported an uptick in international investor interest during COVID. If we have long-term national policy and that commitment and the right frameworks in place from local and regional government, some of that investment will also follow. And I guess if there's one thing I hear time after time from my members, is that they've had enough pilots and demonstrator projects, and we really do need to focus on deployment at scale and an end to beauty contests, really. Given the scale of the opportunity, given the scale of the challenge that we have across the North, there is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be investing in all of these projects rather than seeking to choose between. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emma. Great to hear all the great work that the Northwest Business Leadership Team as well in particular is doing in this area. I lastly wanted to bring in Tony Lloyd, the former and the only interim mayor Greater Manchester's ever had and will probably ever have. So it's great to particularly have Tony with us to share some of his reflections. There's been some great chat, by the way, about nuclear. We are going to pick that up in the next session, so we are slightly running low on time, so I will make sure we get a proper chance to debate some of the issues that people have been bringing up in the chat when we get into the next session. But I will also get maybe Trudy, if she's got time, to come back on some of those points as well when she has the opportunity in this session. But we will, as it has sparked some debate, we've got some disagreement, we'll make the most of it and really emphasize the opportunity to get into the issues. So Tony, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Henry. And I'm not quite sure with the title of the only interim mayor of Greater Manchester is one I'll have on my tombstone, but nevertheless, it's an interesting one. Can I start off by agreeing with what a number of people have woven in and out of this? Some of these questions actually are seriously political ones, and I still go back a little bit to the days of George Osborne, who passionately believed in things I didn't believe in, but where we did agree was on the need to decentralise decision making, and that means decentralising resourcing in the economy, because unless there is a commitment to give the Northwest, or at least the component parts of the Northwest, the resources and the power to make decisions, we will find the delivery question, which in the end underlines everything everybody else has spoken about, null and void. Delivery has to be local, almost by its very nature. Now, that's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make, again, is a political point. We do need to have a debate about the mix of power sources. Nuclear will be controversial, and Henry, I'm delighted if in the second part you do take that issue up. But clearly, there has to be the case made in both directions, and a public that feels comfortable with that. Because I can absolutely guarantee that whilst it may not be number one topic on the agenda now, just look at the way in which fracking arose as an issue in this region in particular, but more generally, the nuclear debate will grow unless it is seized politically at an early stage. So politics matters. A couple of other quick points I want to make. I'm conscious of time. Most of the infrastructure we have in the Northwest dates from the 19th century or early 20th century. I think it's probably something between 80 and 90% of existing domestic buildings will still be with us in 20 or 30 years' time. Now, that means retrofit becomes tremendously important, and that's true across the piece, that we've got to look at how we do retrofits. And I think, can't remember who it was made the point about Mactopia, I think it was Keith Bell. How many of the buildings are we throwing up now are going to be the retrofits of a decade on from now or whenever? And there's some serious points about what standards we operate now, particularly with an under-resourced local government where things like building control have been depleted, and where we do need, again, that partnership between those industries creating and those who protect the public interest. Other couple of quick things, if I can. One of the big issues, of course, in all this is that we have to popularise the debate still. The issue of climate change is literally from global to local. 2050, I think, is too far off, in actual fact. I'm one of those who wants to see action that brings us into a position to decarbonise much more quickly than that, with all the challenges it creates and the opportunities. But one of the challenges that we know absolutely certainly face is we don't have the infrastructure skills, in particular in terms of people skills. We haven't got the trained workforce in the Northwest or nationwide to deliver what we need to deliver. Now, that is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to create an employment base, but it's a challenge because I've been saying this now for, well, a fair number of years without seeing any major response yet. So I think it's the point Emma made. We've got to move from pilot to delivery. The very last couple of months I would want to make of these is that, I can't remember who has mentioned fuel poverty. We've got to make sure that we're bringing everybody with us in this journey. If we leave behind the poor, then not only are we missing a trick, we're doing something that is actually politically, morally obscene. But in particular, one of the things that we've got to do is to make sure that this ceases to be a conversation between expert groups. It's got to be a conversation that includes everybody, that says, what is your part? What part can you play in the decarbonisation of our society, and here in the Northwest, here in the UK, and here globally? We're not there yet because it still is a conversation a bit like this. And I'm not criticising anybody on this webinar. People who know an awful lot about what they're talking about. We've got to make sure it is understood in every household, every business, every institution up and down this region, this land, and this world. Thanks, Henry.
Thank you, Tony. And I particularly enjoyed, as you might guess, your reference to how we make these decisions and how we embrace decarbonisation, because clearly trying to do this from Whitehall and dictate solutions is the wrong one. I would also say there was always a challenge for our friend from Ofgem, because clearly there are two countervailing challenges in the energy world. There is the funding from government, but there is also regulation. And I think that both need to take proper account of the legitimate demands of places to pick their own trajectory based on the needs of their economy. And I mean, maybe I'm a bit of a radical for believing that. I try and say it in nice, slow words. I don't scare too many people, but to me, it sounds pretty sensible. And I think the fact there are people back in Westminster now, Tony, as you are, who have taken back some of these insights from actually doing this stuff for real is very helpful, because certainly people like yourself and Lucy and also our colleague Trudy from Cumbria are all examples on a cross-party basis of parliamentarians who want to take power out of Whitehall and give it to metro mayors and to communities. And that, I think, the fact we have such a strong base of parliamentarians in the Northwest in particular who passionately care about these issues is really important, because when it comes to real policy issues like how you do decarbonisation, it's not just political theory. This isn't some sort of federalist seminar that people have accidentally signed up to. It's about real practical policy, and it's very hard to see how on earth we're going to deal with some of the challenges that particularly have been brought to the table through this discussion about the detail of the choices, whether it's in the next 5 years or the next 3 decades, that can be made centrally from top down and high, because the sort of change Emma's mentioning just cannot be delivered in that way, particularly without the tools to engage with business, that in reality, from the top down, you cannot build the sort of partnerships that Emma was rightly referring to in the industrial space that are so important. I promised to bring Trudy back for the lively chat, which we will get into later, because we've got colleagues from Joe Lappin from the Cumbria Lap, who also have published their based on the work of some of the colleagues in local government in Cumbria, their nuclear prospectus, which does answer some of the challenges I think that partners have brought. And I'm sure we can probably share a copy of the prospectus on the chat, because I think that'll certainly be something that helps to spark debate and discussion really about not nuclear as a technology and an end in itself, but its role as part of a mix, Trudy, which I think is my sort of segue to bring you back in to talk a little bit about sort of not the solution that nuclear provides, but what its place is. Does that make sense? Because I don't think in the Northwest, it isn't a competition, say, between community energy and nuclear. There is an element of we almost need all these things if we're to achieve what we want. And I think there's also some really interesting comments that I'll maybe invite colleagues to bring back into the discussion, because I think another one of our panelists has also had some really interesting things to say about what we call baseload and the difference between that and being able to think, I suppose, in the way Keith describes it, the challenges in the energy system in maybe a more nuanced way. So Trudy, can I bring you in, and then a bit of an advance warning to Keith that I was going to get you to maybe explain some of your comments on the chat in a way that Tony and I would expect the man on the street to understand them, which may be a bit of a challenge for you, but I hope you can take the challenge on. So Trudy, you first, and then Keith.
Thanks, Henry. And yes, I absolutely advocate the Cumbrian Nuclear Prospectus. It is my Bible. I'm very proud of Rob Ward and the team for pulling it together, and it's brilliant that the LEP and Cumbria has supported it. So why nuclear was one of the questions, or more about the struggling to understand the financial gains from nuclear. And firstly, I would say it's so reliable. For 70 years, this isn't a newfangled technology. For 70 years, we have had, since Calder Hall that was built on the Sellafield site, we have had electricity generated from atomic energy, creating heat, generating steam, turning turbines. It's pretty simple, far more complicated in the detail, but as a technology, it's tried, tested, and certainly trusted in our community and those communities that really understand it. Speaking with folks in Wilver, they really understand it. and they're huge advocates for it. So it's reliable, it's safe. In terms of industrial energy providers, it is the safest form of energy generation per unit. It's not cheap. That is a problem, but it could be less expensive. And I think once we agree that the technology is tried and trusted, it's the best way to hit that net zero target. It's the base load that Joe Lappin referred to. Once we agree on that, then it's how to make it less expensive. And that's about the financing model, which government obviously has to play a large part in, particularly for the large scale generators. Perhaps less so for something like a 440 megawatt SMR, and even less so for a smaller, maybe generation 4 type technology. Financially de-risking is essential to effectively incentivise the private market to be interested. But I think what government plays the greatest part in is actually setting the strategy and asking policy to provide direction. And then we move into the operations of how we're going to actually design cheaper. We will do that through repeat design, and then we'll construct cheaper through repeat construction. We will operate cheaper through repeat operation, and that means repeatedly skilling our workforce. And we've seen the benefits from Unit 1 to Unit 2 at Hinkley Point C, where we've got 50% cost reductions in some areas. The fleet build approach is absolutely the way forward if we can agree on one technology. And that's been the challenge, because we've had so many reactor types across the UK. We're now settled on the Hpr at Hinkley Point C, but is that the reactor for the UK long-term future? But in parallel with that, we've got to keep investing and pioneering in innovation. If we're ever to get to fusion, from fission to fusion, you've got advanced modular reactors in the middle, the 4th generation. So I think it's absolutely parallel. Do what we've already done with the tried and tested technology and find ways to make it cheaper. But remember that the money going into there is money going into jobs, it's money going into the UK manufacturing industry, and I want more of that to be UK based. You'll see the flags behind me here, very proud of British manufacturing. But also it's being innovative, because that's what this country has done for decades, and it's certainly what we're very proud of doing in Copeland.
And Keith, I was going to invite you to explain sort of what the role is for different technologies, and maybe sort of if baseload isn't quite the right terminology, how should we be describing intermittency and sort of when the wind stops blowing challenges, right, and how we address them?
Yeah,
I'm really keen to understand a better way of talking about it, because I often feel like I'm not necessarily making a lot of sense when I try and explain it to the public. So if you could particularly try and put it in the layman's tongue, then I think you'd do a great favour to us all. But that may be challenging, but let's try if we can, and then we'll move on to the next panel session once we've got your intervention.
Yeah, thanks. I'll give it a go. And I realised I put a comment on the chat and didn't send it to all attendees. I just sent it to the panelists. I'll copy it later. But the old idea of baseload generation came from the fact that, well, the observation that the demand for electricity never reduced below a certain level. So if you know that, you can design plant that is really efficient when it's left alone, operated at full output, and just leave it there for weeks on end. But what we actually have right now is that the net demand, so what you see after especially small scale renewable generation has been used, is fluctuating a lot. And we've seen it particularly during the sort of COVID crisis and the lockdown, that the net demand seen on the transmission system has been lower than we would have seen for a long, long time. And actually, you almost have too much generation at times, and then you need some flexibility, the ability to be able to reduce output in order to keep the system stable. So what I kind of think about then is, well, I might not use the term firm power. So this characteristic of being able to really rely on it, you can schedule it some days, even weeks in advance, and you can rely on it continuing to operate for some days or weeks. It's a really important characteristic somewhere in the mix, because as you mentioned, Henry, it's not windy all the time. And we can see wind droughts, as I might call them, that might last for a week, 2-3 weeks. So something's got to fill in that gap. But you also need, as well as that sort of dependability, You also need flexibility because things move around a lot, and they're going to move around in terms of the net demand a lot more than they have done in the past. So schedulability, flexibility, and the kind of persistence. And wind is very flexible, but it's not persistent. Nuclear stations, as we have them at the moment, are schedulable and persistent, but not flexible. Batteries can be very flexible, but they don't. Once you discharge them, they don't last very long. We've got to get the right mix, basically. I hope that helps a bit.
No, and I think also none of us here are. I mean, certainly we at the Northern Powers Partnership, we would advocate that the North has lots of different assets to bring, right? Existing ones and then new emerging technologies, and it's the blend of those that's and the challenge is what mix you need of the different elements, right, to get the optimal decarbonisation pathway. But I think
exactly.
Certainly the industrial strategy opportunities, and I think what Trudy was advocating for her communities, and I think others will do so throughout the day, is the jobs that come, right? So we're not talking about electricity or energy in isolation. We're talking about jobs, and so that connection between employment and good quality skilled jobs that we have for long had across the M62, right, in our coal-fired power stations. How do we recreate those, but also reimagine those? Because obviously, it's that just transition piece that I think is particularly interesting, and certainly plays to some of the challenges around how we can be a leader in this field. That it isn't just about these things in isolation; it's the way it interacts with the people who currently and will work in this industry in the future. And obviously, their livelihoods are also on the line, as well as the environment. And those two things are quite powerful motivators, hopefully, to not just politicians, but I know certainly to people like Peter and to ENW colleagues. It's now time for our commercial breaks. This is a new departure for me in my career to announce the coming of the commercial break. So without getting too ant and deck, obviously that's a northeast example, and I'm virtually in the northwest today, so I don't want to get run out for the wrong geographical tribalism. So on that note, we will go to the commercial break. There's also a poll for those of you who are staying with us and not nipping off to make a cup of tea. So I do encourage you to stay for the video, and then we'll be starting again live in just a few moments' time.
Plan B. Changes have to happen. We can take the right steps towards decarbonization of our energy systems, not just electricity. I see a future where most of us will have photovoltaics in our rooftops. We are going to use in very clever ways our energy needs in a much more localized way. We need to interact with the electricity network, or in general with other different infrastructures that supply our energy needs. And this requires some significant change in how we think we use energy.
If everybody down your street had an electric vehicle and plugged it in and we did nothing, our cables would burn out. We couldn't cope with a massive increase in load.
If the electricity network can't cope with ever-increasing demand, the impact on everyone in society would be huge.
But what if we had a different relationship with our customers, so that we guaranteed that their cars would be charged whenever they wanted to, but that we would manage the timing of the charging process, so that our network could cope with it and our customers could connect whenever they wanted to? It's doing something in a different way and a smarter way.
This requires sophisticated technology that we do not yet have deployed in our infrastructure. And that's part of the change. It's not just the technologies, they are just a building block. We need this infrastructure that will, in a very coherent manner, put everything together and will help customers realizing the maximum of these new technologies.
And in order for us to do this, we'll need a system that will allow us to manage the energy in the Northwest in real time.
These energy management systems can interact with other systems that manage the whole network, the electricity network. And this clever management of different elements and customers can make the life of a customer much simpler, much more cost-effective in terms of electricity bills. Critical that the network management system can understand large amounts of data to help Electricity North West meet the ever-changing demands of their consumers.
We need many radical changes for future network, deliver sustainable enhancement to enable supply to meet demand.
We have a golden opportunity now to take that leap forward, to get a technology that's ready for the future.
We are working with Schneider, who are the leaders in the sector. They see us as the leader in innovation in the UK. What a fantastic partnership, developing our NMS system that will serve us for decades to come, serving the people of the Northwest.
It's a great opportunity to leave my footprint on this new project, so I can be on this turning point of electric history.
NMS will affect people in different ways. To our customers, they should see no impact. They should continue to get the same level of service that they get now, despite increasing their needs. But to our employees in the control room and out into the field, they should see information at their fingertips and the tools and ability to change the network at the push of a button.
The new NMS system will benefit our customers now and customers of future generations. For example, in a power cut, currently we rely on customers phoning in to tell us that they're off supply. With the new NMS and with potentially the new smart meter data as well being brought into one system, we'll be able to know customers are off supply without them phoning in. We can target where we need to deploy our resources to repair and restore faults, and this will be much better for our customers.
Electricity North West aspires to be the leading energy delivery business, and if we want to lead from the front, we need to make changes now to ensure we're ready to provide the best customer service we possibly can.
So the changes today that we make will mean that future generations have got a low carbon, sustainable and reliable electricity network within the Northwest.
We've been evolving over recent years, but over the next few years, we're going to see more change than we've seen over the last 50. We're going to make sure that we're ready for that.
So great to be back, and thank you so much to everyone for staying with us for this second hour of today's session. So we've had some violent agreement in the poll again, which is good to see. We don't want to completely disagree after our discussions in the last hour. Did prompt a bit more debate, and I think particularly the case for the regionally led response is one that Tony rightly led the charge for, and thanks particularly to Tony for all the challenges he's had in the last few months for being with us. It's great to have you with us, Tony. So thank you so much. In this next session, we're really delighted to have another stellar panel, and I really appreciate all of those who joined us for the last session and made some really exciting and interesting contributions. We're still thinking about how we lead the way on net zero and the green recovery. But obviously in this session, I think we particularly want to focus a little bit more perhaps on the jobs, renewables and investment opportunities, which we maybe didn't cover as much as in the last session. We started to get into, obviously, with the debates around Cumbria in particular, but I'm sure we'll get similar insights into the Greater Manchester and Lancashire perspectives. There's also obviously fuel poverty as a particular issue I know we want to pick up. And then in the last session, you did hear a bit about the devolved energy agreements and the opportunity to use Ofgem's framework for local energy action plans to bring a real partnership approach to this. And I know in this session, we'll be getting into some of that. Joining us now, we have a number of panelists, I think, being added to us as we speak. So they're with us now. We'll be starting off with Lucy Powell MP, the MP for Manchester Central, now Shadow Business Minister in the Labour opposition. So great to have you with us, Lucy. We have Angela Needle, who's the Director of Strategy at Cadent. Joe Lappin, who was referred to earlier and has shared some things in the chats, the Chief Executive of the Cumbria LEP. We have Jonathan Atkinson, the co-founder of the Carbon Co-op. Melanie On, the former MP for Grimsby, so has some of my other side of the Pennines baggage today. So it's again, great to welcome Mel to us in her new role as Deputy Chief Executive of Renewable UK, and Miranda Barker, who's the Chief Executive of the East Lancashire LEP, but also has worked, sorry, not the LEP, yes, a member of the LEP and the Chief Executive of the East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce. Goodness me, really, I am losing it this morning, clearly. So I'm going to ask Lucy to go first with some of her insights and views. It's particularly great to have you with us, Lucy. So thank you so much for making the time in your busy diaries. You do so much on the COVID response. So thank you for finding the time to talk about some of these issues as well. I know are really, really close to your heart. And obviously in your role as chair of the Greater Manchester All-Party Group, I know you've done a particular amount about thinking about some of the detail of the policy issues as well as the overarching objectives. So thanks for joining us, Lucy.
Thanks very much, Henry. And yes, this is my television spot for those of you who see me on the TV. Some people think that's a shower behind me, but no, it's just a John Lewis lamp. But yeah, thanks for having me today, and for Jill and everyone pulling this together. You know, we always fantastic panels and conversations, and we've been doing quite a lot of work thinking about some of these issues through the Greater Manchester All-Party Parliamentary Group and elsewhere. And you know, particularly pleased to see my old select committee colleague Trudy Harrison as well. Trudy's a brilliant MP, and we work really closely together on the select committee. It's not very often we get to chat these days, Trudy, so good to see you. And obviously Mel, it's great to see Melanie on as well, looking so gorgeous. Life After Parliament obviously suiting you a great deal. You're an advert for it, and yeah, look forward to hearing from everybody else, and Jonathan Atkinson from my patch too, so good to see him here. So yeah, I mean, I think this is a really important sort of discussion, and there's people much better qualified than me to answer some of the key questions sort of on this panel. I just wanted to say a little bit about some of the politics and the sort of opportunities and challenges I think that we sort of face at the moment. We definitely do have a real opportunity in the Northwest to lead the way on these issues, and I think Greater Manchester is leading that way. But to really maximise that and capitalise that on, and I know it's the sort of boring kind of refrain of all of us sort of talking about regional inequalities and devolution, but you know, we do need to match some of that ambition with some more powers really to be able to do some of the things that we want to do. And we are also going to need to be more agile than possibly we have in the past as well, because we're in a very, very fast changing context with all the consequences of the coronavirus pandemic as well. So yeah, we do need, I think, a sort of step change. We've got some real opportunities politically in the coming year or so with the COP26, the G7 and G20 presidencies, and I think the UK has got a real opportunity to kind of lead the way here. And I think making the Northwest and GM part of that conversation would be great. But also, I mean, the Northwest obviously has been seeing some of the real effects of climate change recently, in the North more generally, with the flooding and so on, and change in weather. But also we have some of the highest levels of poverty as well in our region, and that gap between sort of rich and poor ever growing, and the levelling up agenda, I think, you know, needs to be part of this conversation as well. So I mean, just in terms of the current economic crisis, that I think potentially some real opportunities here for this agenda, but there's some real challenges as well. I mean, certainly we've seen from the change in behaviour, change in how people are working and how people are living, that the sort of clean air agenda, for example, and emissions have dropped significantly through the lockdown. People have really valued kind of green space and their local community and their local amenities, and we've seen a lot of community action and things arising out of the coronavirus crisis. But if we are to sort of build back better, I think the challenge has to be, how do we sustain some of that? Because of course it might all start to go in the wrong direction again, as people, you know, beginning to sort of return to work, but doing so avoiding public transport and actually returning to using the car in a bigger way than they were before. So you know, we've got to kind of seize the moment with that, and everyone will hopefully know that across Greater Manchester we have committed to net zero by 2038, which is a lot sooner than the national commitment, and that is driving a lot of policy in Greater Manchester, particularly the clean air agenda. But we reiterating that commitment even in the context of the economic crisis that we're in, which is a really good thing. But I do feel that it does need some adjusting as well, because we've got to also look at the context of jobs and poverty and the economic sort of viability of these things. And of course, we had car use out of the clean air, still is out of the clean air sort of targets. Yet sort of taxis and coaches, for example, and buses, you know, the use of those is significantly down. Many are on the verge of going out of business altogether, and they're all included in the clean air zone. So you know, I think we are going to need to look at adjusting these things in the context of how the long-term behaviour change may come about. So we've got these targets, and we've got some policies, some really tough policies to kind of deliver them. But you know, we still do need some more powers to do that over infrastructure projects, over bus services, and so on, and also highways, which are not included in that. And I think the big challenge for this agenda, as I'm sure you've already discussed, is, you know, is how an agenda for net zero can work for the poorest in society and not be something that that is, you know, makes that more of a challenge for those who live in fuel poverty. And we do have the second highest level of people living in fuel poverty in the northwest. And I think a lot of the impacts of coronavirus economic crisis are disproportionately hitting those on low incomes and the poorest in society, and the young, and so on. So the opportunities of that, and I think there are opportunities which I think the government can take, and I think us in the Northwest and GM can take, in terms of transitioning, because what comes out of an economic crisis is always a transition. And I think the question is, do we manage that transition to a net zero economy with green jobs of the future, or do we just allow that transition to happen by itself? And that's usually a much more disruptive and long-term difficult way of doing it, in my opinion. So we've got some of the key industries have been disproportionately impacted by the crisis, such as steel, automotive, aerospace, and automotive, obviously particularly strong in our region. You know, real opportunity, I think, now to invest in those industries, to re-engineer their products to net zero. We've got the challenge for jet zero from the government, but I think the scale and the ambition of what we're seeing so far isn't matching the challenge. And you only have to look at what's happening in France and Germany, and the scale of the commitment there to re-engineering their key industries. I think just yesterday France announced a £90 billion package, another £90 billion package for carbon reduction as part of their COVID response. So I think, you know, some of that, it requires governmental action. We could have more powers and resources to support those important industries here in our region, and work as partners really on research and development, on you know, putting all our best engineers, all our best industries on these challenges and features as part of a job creation package that then helps us to level up and ensure that the response to this is part of a jobs-focused economic conversation, and not just, as important as it is, just only a climate change sort of challenge. So they were just some comments I had at the beginning, Henry, really.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for that. And I think really good to have views from the shadow ministerial team about particularly how energy interacts with the wider economy, but also to get your kind of reflections on the importance of the targets that GM are setting. And obviously with Ofgem being with us for the next session, clearly a really strong message about the importance of targets at the level of place, which I know we'll pick up in the session with Jonathan. So really great that you could make that point so directly. Can I next invite Angela Needle, the Director of Strategy at Cadent, to give us a couple of minutes of reflections from her as well.
Hi, hello everybody, thanks Henry. So I'm Angie Needle, Strategy Director at Cadent, and big thank you to Electricity Northwest for inviting me to this event today. We've been working really closely together on thinking about how the collective energy infrastructure for the Northwest looks like, both electricity and gas, especially as you pace forward faster than some other regions in getting to net zero by 2038. You really have to think collaboratively. This is not a one versus another thing anymore. It's not electricity versus gas or nuclear versus, it's all of it. We have to look at all of it. And ultimately, this is about consumers and the choices that they're going to make and how much they're going to have to pay for it. So those of you who don't know, Cadent looks after the gas distribution network in large parts of the Northwest and also other regions in the country. And as Emma Degg very succinctly said, there is no perfect solution here, and waiting for one to be written down for us to deliver, I think, is a little bit dangerous. So we may need to push forward on lots of fronts so that we land on, and not necessarily the perfect solution, but at least a solution, which I think is important. From a whole system point of view, though, at Cadent, we think about gas today as a fossil gas and something which we cannot have in our network in the future. So we're working very hard on looking at green gases such as hydrogen and biomethane. And as has been mentioned already, there's a big role that this will play in providing flexible energy sources. So you can store gas, which is helpful. So it helps deal with the intermittency issue of renewables. There's also some very hard to decarbonise parts of industry, which requires a flame, if you like, for want of a better word. Also parts of heavy transport and actually sections of heating in homes that we will find difficult to electrify for a whole range of reasons. It could be the building fabric, or it could be the age of the property, or something else. That means that you may need a gas solution there too. So whilst we're working out how much hydrogen we might need, or biomethane, we, the gas networks, are looking at, is it safe and technically feasible, and how would we make that happen? On the jobs fronts, it's really helpful. The Hydrogen Task Force have just published their economic impact assessment of hydrogen. And they think the UK could have an 18 billion GVA hydrogen economy by 2035, bringing 75,000 jobs to the UK, with most of those jobs coming in the Northwest and the Northeast, because that's where we think hydrogen's going to be made first and at scale. The jury's still out as to whether that will happen, but that's a significant opportunity for the Northwest to take advantage of. And Cadent's part of the consortium, HyNet consortium, that some of you will have heard of. This is an industrial cluster in the Northwest that we're looking at making sufficient hydrogen for industry to switch to. It creates a pathway to decarbonise 10 million tonnes of CO2 in the Northwest, and it'll enable blending into the gas grid should we choose to do that at further phases in the future. It's a really important part of the overall picture for the Northwest's decarbonisation plan, and we see that bringing at least 6,000 jobs in the near term, because that's a project we'd like to start this decade, please. And so then what's needed? I absolutely agree that there is a case for regional plans. Regions are not the same when it comes to decarbonisation. They have different skills, different geographies, different resources, and different intent, actually, which creates different pace and needs. So I'm very much supportive of there being a regional focus on net zero. There is a tension between national resilience and, from an infrastructure point of view, making that happen versus regions, but I'm sure that that can be resolved. And then only a last couple of points from me, because I know time's tight. There's a couple of things that I think is really, really needed, and I'm talking from a sort of hydrogen perspective here. Having a strategy, and actually this goes for other things that are needed. Having a strategy that unlocks investor confidence is a priority. So government does need to set us some goals that will provide some certainty and unlock that investment. And then the other bit is about regulation that supports that. We are going to have to be pacey problem solvers when it comes to infrastructure. We need a regulatory mechanism that is flexible and allows innovation and pace to happen. So I'm glad that Jonathan Brearley's talking about that later, but we're very supportive from a Cadent point of view in enabling net zero investment to happen sooner rather than later. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of the things that I care about, Henry.
Absolutely fab. And we did have a question in the chat about the role of hydrogen. So I was going to bring that into the discussion, but I think you've answered every opportunity that you could potentially have. And I think the industrial and the jobs element and the partnership across the Pennines, obviously as a slight interloper from the wrong side of the Pennines, I think is really well made, because I think it's an opportunity of a scale that is really important, and certainly the UK government have acknowledged, and so we need to make sure that's carried across through the energy industry, and that the intent of government is well understood in the way in which the regulatory framework sets, because clearly there is a disconnect perhaps between regulatory policy making and government policy, and that's government's fault for not having published a white paper yet, but we need to fix that as soon as earthly possible. So next we're going to Joe from the Cumbria LEP, and obviously a big build up for the strategy that's been launched, the prospectus for nuclear in Cumbria. But I know there's a lot as well at the wider LEP's doing, that partners are doing across Cumbria, and I'm sure Joe will tell us a bit about what not only the LEP are doing, but local government partners from particularly the district councils who really positively take such a strong interest in energy, debate it, and the pathway and decarbonisation. So clearly, of course, there are different views about particular paths for decarbonisation and within the county, and those differences of opinion are probably based on a really interesting and key debate about the particular pathways that can be taken. And I think that's something that shows the interest from the public and businesses as much as anything else. So really great to have your perspectives, Joe, from what is certainly a very energy aware part of the Northwest, if nothing else.
I was going to say thanks, Henry, and it's going to be debated yet again today at the Leaders Board in terms of methodology, etc. I'll keep it very brief because I'm conscious of time, but I think the thing that we do need to stress, Trudy's done a brilliant job on selling Cumbria's nuclear credentials. But for me, it's about the entirety of the energy generation offer that we need to be working with businesses to unleash. So we, until very recently, had the world's largest offshore wind farm off the coast at Barrow. Round 4 licensing, that will bring the title back to us as the world's largest operational wind farm. We've got key opportunities in tidal, wave and battery, and for me it's very much about how do we bring all of those different sources together. And we see in Cumbria that we've got a job for the nation. We can produce far more energy than we actually consume, and that builds on the North's credential. We produce 41% of electricity and actually only consume 28%, so we start in a fabulous place opportunity wise. I think the thing for me that the real opportunities, Henry, is we've probably not been successful enough in exploiting supply chain opportunities for our local geography and also employment opportunities. So for us, as part of our recovery planning, clean energy is a big, big theme, as is diversify to thrive, which is about those supply chain opportunities, etc. In terms of our priorities, we see as an economic body, it's about unleashing that energy generation potential, but we also want to be working with our businesses on serious decarbonisation planning, and we also want to be working with our transport authorities on how is that achieved. In Cumbria, there is a very ambitious plan to deliver net zero by 2037. Where we are in the LEP is we are very, very serious about this. Net zero is one of the 3 touchstones in our recovery strategy. But in doing that, we want very focused business-like plans with serious measures for delivery. And in terms of making that happen, I think what we would like to see is a consistent methodology about how do we calculate, how do we look at doing this, that makes sense at a national level. There's no point mentioning the energy white paper, but we really do need it. It's hugely important on signalling to business. I think the other thing that we need collectively is a serious response to CSR in order to address the points that were made at the outset around we're currently disincentivizing business to invest in green technology. So for me, they're things that we do need to look at. And I think the point I'd like to finish with is the point that was made by Keith about we need mechanisms that genuinely engage everybody and take them with us on moving this agenda forward. It's got to be unifying rather than divisive. So very much about balance, engagement, and serious plans for achievement. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you to Joe, and always great to hear those insights. And it's great to have a lively debate about decarbonisation trajectories, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think that's a sign that these things are meaningful, right? Because what you don't want is people picking numbers out of a hat and then claiming that's policy. Actually, what you want to have is evidence-based and people having a robust debate. And if a county like Cumbria that's future depends on energy, the most important decision should be how and when it seeks to decarbonise for. I think how is probably the more important question, but we'll get onto maybe that a little bit later. But the fact there's a lively debate is to be welcomed. So next we have Jonathan Atkinson, who's the co-founder of the Carbon Co-op. So Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks Henry. And yeah, I'm looking forward to being involved in a lively debate and to put the case really for local bottom-up and cooperative and social enterprise approaches to decarbonisation, and in particular into retrofit, which is our area of specialism. We're a not-for-profit organisation, citizen-led decarbonisation services, so we deliver services rather than just simply advocate for them. And we're fast growing. We're based in Greater Manchester. We actually operate across the Northwest, and we work with and in collaboration with other partners such as Hpr Action for Sustainability and other people around, like in Liverpool and where have you. Our areas of operation, we work closely with Electricity Northwest around demand side response and the creation of new local flexibility markets and trying to integrate those into households and into household services. We're also very much involved in energy democracy and involving citizens in those decision-making processes. But really our focus has and always is retrofit and energy efficiency. And a number of speakers have talked about the challenge of retrofit and the challenge of like cracking that market, which has been a hard nut to crack really. Our current project, which I've put a link there in the chat, is People Powered Retrofit. It's an end-to-end service for householders. So for the first time in this area, people can come to us simply interested in retrofit. They don't know what to do, got a bit of money, they've got a bit of interest, they want to improve their house, and we can take them through the whole process, from advice, assessment, through to on-site works. It's focused in particular on owner occupiers, but we do stuff around that. And it's backed by BAYS as well, which is like a welcome thing. Two bits of key learning from that I'd like to highlight. And one is like householders. There is a huge amount of demand from householders for these kinds of services. There is perhaps a kind of assumption within some policy-making circles, perhaps in London, that householders are very mechanistic. They'll just take a cost-benefit analysis on something. If it makes sense money-wise, they'll go for it. That's not at all what we see. We see a lot of committed people interested for a whole variety of reasons in improving their home, doing their bit for the environment, being more comfortable in their home, and saving a bit of money. So there's huge demand there that's currently untapped. The second is around contractors and the real potential for jobs there. There is a huge number of contractors already working in our homes on extensions and loft conversions and all sorts of things. Absolutely skilled, really good quality contractors who are based down the road from people in their local communities. They are currently untapped, and policymakers, again in London, they see large scale organisations, your Carillions, your tier 1 contractors, and they're not tapping into the local supply chain, and that's really where the jobs are, the potential for new jobs. So my kind of three throwing it out there arguments really around decarbonisation in the Northwest is local approach, bottom up, and cooperative and social enterprise led. In terms of local, Mark was talking about this, local energy systems where we're seeing a synthesis between generation, distribution, consumption and different services. They're all coming together. There's a Greater Manchester project on this that we're involved with, the local energy market, but increasingly the energy system is local, and that's where we need to be in innovation there. It's also, I've had a little pop at London-based policymakers. It's about local expertise and local knowledge, so benefiting from those.
Sorry, Jonathan, we're just running really late. I'm gonna have to stop you there, but thanks. Sorry to interrupt you.
Okay.
Flow. Mel, can I bring you in? Melanie on now from Renewable UK.
Hi, Henry. Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to join in this discussion today. It's great to see some of my former colleagues here contributing to something that I feel really passionate about, not only trying to accelerate the country's drive towards net zero, but also getting those regional benefits that will come from a genuine focus and a motivation from government to try and, I think, make an economic recovery entirely a green economic recovery. I think that is the only way that we're going to achieve some of the really ambitious targets that the government has set. So if I frame this in my world of the renewable sector ahead of the last general election, which is not the most pleasant of memories for me, as people might appreciate. But one of the things that came out of that general election campaign from the Conservatives was a new target for trying to achieve 40 gigawatts of power through renewable sources and achieving that by 2030. Now that brought forward the target by 10 years, a whole decade. And that for the sector is an enormous challenge. But it's also an enormous opportunity. So setting that in the political context, we've got COP26, obviously we're expecting that to take place this year, but it will be taking place next year. So to try and achieve this target and set it against the backdrop of COP26 and trying to demonstrate significant progress, there's a huge amount that not only industry can do, but that government can do to enable us to reach that target. So at the moment, there are some quite technical barriers to achieving that. I think we're changing our terminology, actually. I think we're shifting it from barriers to pathways to enable us to properly grow this sector. And there are issues because we are seeing ever larger turbines. We are seeing ever larger wind farms in the entirety, as Joe was talking about. I thought it was very interesting to hear that, this kind of West Coast, East Coast challenge to who can have the biggest wind farm. But that brings with it some real challenges because as they get ever larger in terms of space, it means that our sea space is busier. It means that, demands on the maritime side of things is more complicated as those turbines get ever taller. I think that, far larger than the Blackpool Tower are the Walney extension turbines that have recently gone up. And that causes problems in terms of aviation. We have environmental considerations also to factor in to these rapid developments. And we have to try and do all of that holistically. And why I'm really pleased to be part of this sector now is the commitment, because there is a geographic imperative around this. We are generally based in coastal areas that traditionally have struggled to get the best benefits out of economic growth. Haven't always been cities. Some of them are. I'm not going to, take away from those cities that are coastal. But very often, and if I look in my own backyard in Grimsby, they have had a really turbulent time, and we've seen those long-standing industries that communities have relied on disappearing over the period of the last 40, 30, 20 years. And so that's why this is such a fantastic opportunity. And if we see that rapid growth between now and 2030, it's only, are we in 2021 now? So we've got a decade to go. The lockdown has completely thrown my timeline. We've got a decade to go to try and achieve this 40 gig target. And If we do that through renewables, we're going to see £50 billion worth of investment. There is an opportunity for 27,000 directly employed jobs. And those are going to be going to the areas that the government in its levelling up agenda is so keen to achieve. So there is a huge amount of opportunity. And if we think about what we've already seen in some areas, I'll just talk about Hull in particular, because it had a Siemens Gamesa investment that came in a few years ago, and as much as it is the other side of the river, and there is local tensions between who gets the most benefit, actually having those 1,000 jobs directly employed in the factory has had a huge impact on the local community, and that's exactly what we would hope to see in other areas around the community, around the country. Sorry. So Hull City Council did some analysis. And it says that that factory, that investment has given a 10% improvement in local GVA over the last 5 years, 13% improvement in local unemployment figures, a 60% reduction in local unemployment benefit claimants, and 30% growth in local enterprises. And those are really striking figures. I think you can find those on the Hull City Council website if you want to use those in any future conversations about what material benefit local areas can get. But scaling up from where we are now and getting those supply chains, particularly getting more in terms of the manufacturing side of things, is a real challenge. It's a very live conversation that is taking place. We are having regular meetings with government about how we can achieve that and how we can deliver, because there is a real commitment from the sector to try and exploit every opportunity that is available to us. There is a real desire to make sure that the communities in which these companies are based really do feel the benefits of them being there, which I think is really important. And I would like to see much more, Henry touched on just transition. I would like to see much more conversation about that just transition, because we are going to see rapid changes in the oil and gas sector over the coming years, and how we deal with that and how communities are impacted and how we move forward as we go through that transition is going to be absolutely critical, and making sure that we don't have communities that are left behind in the way that lots of communities unfortunately have felt when we have seen significant industrial transition in years gone by. I'll leave it at that, Henry, because I know we're very late.
Yeah, thanks, Mel. And I wouldn't rush people if we weren't so late. And I'd hope to bring in some more people from the chat, including Erica from Lancaster, sort of part of the kind of the kind of Cumbria-Lancashire border, but we are just running so late. I was going to go straight now to our last speaker, to Miranda, who is the Chief Exec of the East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce, after my earlier mistake. And I know she'll probably want to talk a little bit about the view of business. So we'll go to Miranda, and then I'll be bringing Jonathan. I'll be bringing our next speaker in straight away, just to give Jonathan Brearley a little bit of warning. So there won't be much of a warm up, I'm afraid, Jonathan. I'll be very strict, giving you as much time as possible, because people want to hear from you, not from me introing you. So straight to Miranda now.
Thanks, Henry. Yes, I'll be short and sharp, so apologies for the bullet point delivery. Yes, I'm one of the LEP directors in Lancashire, as well as the Chamber Chief Exec. I'm also an environmental consultant by background, and at the Chamber we do a lot in terms of low carbon support projects across Lancashire, both to support SMEs adopting low carbon strategies, but also now with some of Robert Jenwick's shovel ready money to do the capital injection into new low carbon technologies, including diversification for auto and aero companies under pressure into that sector, which I think is a key opportunity we need to capitalise on. So in terms of the questions, do we have the opportunity to lead on net zero as a region? And also, what does that do, or how do we capitalise on that to make sure we see the investment in the jobs? And obviously I would say yes. But we have the opportunity to lead both as deliverers and drivers of innovation into that sector, but also to really see sound adoption across the sector. But there are things that we need to see happen to make both of those things come true. In terms of our delivery as low carbon leaders and innovators, we've got an awful lot of companies across the whole of the Northwest, which excel in this field, in developing, innovating with huge amounts of higher education support, but also real manufacturing capability and the ability to then export those technologies. So it's really big for the UK economy. We need to make sure we capitalise on this for the Northwest. But we also have excellent, as I say, opportunities to diversify our advanced manufacturers into this route. And that can be a boon to keep the jobs in the Northwest while we're waiting for things like civil aviation to actually recover. What do we need to make that delivery possible? We need a sound energy policy, as we've all been saying. We need further investment in that commercialisation and capital funding to make those innovations actually land in the market. We also need the collaboration we've been talking about here today. We can't have hydrogen being led in one place, nuclear being led in one place. We need to band together so we are showing a cohesive argument and a single bid to government for investment to create the maximum benefit for the area. And then secondly, how do we drive forward the adoption of these things by our business communities? Business has big issues right now with security of supply. We've got manufacturers who literally can't expand their sites because they know they don't have the security of supply. We need to make sure companies have no barriers to putting renewable generation on their sites so they can buffer those peaks and troughs and help the national grid. And we need to keep working with people like the Environment Agency who have a role to reduce the high energy emitters. So what do we need to make sure that adoption happens? We need a fair carbon taxation policy implemented as soon as possible to drive us towards renewables and away from carbon intensive energy. We need changes to planning to remove constraints on housing and any kind of commercial building. We have to set really high baselines for net zero standards within any new build so that then the market can actually drive that. And we need a grid that works for that two-way generation and feedback so that businesses can see the capital investment benefit from doing that and really drive that take-up of new low carbon technologies. We have a huge opportunity and the Northwest has the opportunity to lead on this, but we've got to act now. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. And I'll give you being so short, the privilege of taking a friendly shot at Jonathan's remarks if you want when he finishes, because I know we're very privileged to have him with us and virtually in the north, which is as good as physically in his role, is still very much a new broom, and we're really thrilled to hear what you've got to say, particularly Jonathan, I suppose, about how as an economic regulator you can respond to places and their institutions the same way you have to respond to government. So we're not seeking to dictate your agenda, but I think we would like a level playing field with the way you treat central government, bluntly. And I don't know whether you feel you can do that, but I certainly think if COVID-19 has proved anything, it's that local communities look to leaders in their places, and our constitutional settlement in the UK has changed a bit in the last few years. So those references to energy policy and many of the devolution agreements, I'm sure, are something your policy teams are well aware of. And the intent, certainly, of my chair, George Osborne, when he was Chancellor, was that people in our city regions would have a lot more influence over things like the decarbonisation pathway. I understand that will be in the government's forward programme. So I hope there won't be a choice to be made, but I think you've certainly got willing partners. I hope you've picked up from this conversation who want to help you to achieve the government's legal requirements to reach net zero and want to work in partnership so that regulation and policy from a local government and a city region perspective can all be pulling in the same direction and allow those like Electricity Northwest to play their part as a DNO, but also allow the gas companies to play their part as well.
Sure. Well, listen, Henry, thank you. And look, I'm delighted to be here, and it's been a fascinating morning. I actually thought I'd start just a bit with my background. So before I came to Ofgem, I worked on climate change and energy policy for a long time. I set up the Climate Change Act to start with. I worked on the contracts for difference for offshore wind. And I just actually want to start by, a feeling I always get when we have these conferences, which is just to celebrate how far we've already come. It was great, Joe, to hear about us having the largest offshore wind farm and soon to have again after round 4. There's a great deal that we've done already. And I think we've demonstrated the value of taking a risk in policy terms and seeing that technology change at a pace that none of us imagined. So Melanie referred to that target for offshore wind in 2030. I was around when people were really wondering whether this was a sensible thing to do at all. And I go to international conferences, and we were seen as quite an eccentric sort of country for pursuing a technology in the way we had. But I think it's really paid off, and I hope we continue that as we go through this transition. And when I think about my role, and I'm still relatively new, 6 months in, there's two images I have. One is that big challenge around decarbonisation, but the other really is some of the conversations I have with some of the most vulnerable and fuel poor energy customers we have. And the one that I always kind of go back to is someone who was in social housing in Edinburgh, who was really struggling with her energy bill, where every single pound she spent counted. She had all sorts of other issues with her retailer, which I won't go into. But in essence, to me, that articulates what Ofgem is trying to do. So in statutory terms, we have an objective that is to ensure that we promote the needs of current and future consumers. And in my mind, that means making sure all of us have fair access to our energy today, but also that we make that transition to net zero in the most effective way possible. And in essence, what I'm here to say mainly is we are here to work with all of you to try and achieve that. The other piece of experience I would have is that, yes, the change happens very differently across different parts of the country. There are different local ambitions, there are different local conditions, and that's something that we absolutely recognise. Now, Henry, you talked about the pandemic, and before I kind of get into that long term, I'd like to spend a bit of time just on what we did and how things have worked. And in virtually every public forum I've been to since the pandemic started, I do want to say a big thank you to all of those who work in the energy industry, particularly ENW in this case, but and Cadent. But in a sense, we have all worked together to tackle some enormous problems. We had problems of people on prepayment meters unable to get out of their houses because they were self-isolating, risking being cut off from power. We had a massive task to adapt our services, both in retail and in the networks, to make sure we focused on what mattered. And really the industry came together when we thought there was a supplier financing problem, and the network companies like ENW stepped in to make sure that the sector was stable. Now, we're not out of it yet, and we're still all working on that. But the main thing I want to say is I think that was a very, very different way of working that we went through, because all of us had a massive common problem we needed to solve. It meant that we as a regulator moved much faster than we normally do. All of us put aside the sort of second order disagreements we had, and all of us focused on what mattered, even at times as if that meant that we disagreed with the final position that we came to. And in my mind, that really does give us a platform to work together as we come out of COVID, as we think about green recovery, and indeed as we move on to think about the things we need to do to tackle net zero. Now, Ofgem is working closely with companies like ENW and all the network companies, really to identify, first of all, what can we do now? What can we do now that we could bring forward that will drive greater investment and therefore support the recovery? Equally, what can we do now that will drive innovation and change that will help us in the future? And we've been very open with the network companies that we are happy to talk about changes to the existing regime that may make that possible. Equally, as I'm sure many people know, we have been in the process of developing our next set of price controls. Now, I don't think I need to hide from this audience that this has been controversial, that there are areas where we are still in conversation with the industry. But all I'd point out is the spirit of these price controls is something that I think is unprecedented. So normally what you say in a price control, so that's for the networks, the amount of cash we give networks, we're going to give it to you at the end of this year and we fix it for 5 years and then we'll come and have a look at it again. What we are saying this time is that we don't think that is going to be enough. And to be clear, we think we need more investment on net zero than has been laid out in the existing business plans of the companies. So therefore, we've put in something called a reopener, a capacity to flex investment that we think could bring forward around £10 billion of investment, which will support the development of the network going forward. So in both of the combination of both of those things, thinking about what we can do now, but how we set up a system that is fit for purpose to drive us to net zero is absolutely fundamental to the way in which we think about network regulation. I ought to be open and clear though, we have asked for something from the companies. We have said to them, they need to be as efficient as they possibly can be. Coming back to that customer who really worries about their bills, we need companies to be reasonable, both in terms of what they're asking for to run their companies, but equally what the returns that investors get. And ultimately, in my mind, That is the shape of the proposal that we are putting forward and the current proposal that we're debating with the industry. Now, we've had a great deal of feedback on that, and I'm sure over time we will adapt what we have, but those principles, I think, are the principles which underpin the decisions that we're trying to make. Now, when it comes on to the question of, what do different areas want to do, Henry? And I think you've mentioned a couple of times through this, you would like us to talk about that. I mean, we absolutely accept that there are very, very different needs and ambitions in different areas of the country. And that is fundamental to what we're trying to achieve. And Peter and I know we're about to go through the same process on the local electricity networks. And I think that's going to be more important than ever. So the way we have our customer user groups feeding into that process, the way we can ask Peter to work with local areas to adapt those plans and make sure those plans fit for purpose is really important. I won't deny there are going to be some difficult trade-offs for us all, particularly where an ambition in one place leads to costs in another, and we will have to work through that together. But Ofgem comes at this with a spirit of wanting to unlock the pathway to net zero and wanting to do so in ways that align with ambitions that are set out in all different parts of the country. I can refer to the Scottish target, the Glasgow target, the Edinburgh target, the Manchester target. All of these are incredibly important, and we really should work to try and find a way to deliver that as best we possibly can. And one reflection on that, which again just points back to going back to when I started all this in kind of sort of 2005, 2006, we've always talked a lot about the trade-offs between climate change and cost and security of supply. I believe, and this includes networks, that the synergies are getting much bigger than the trade-offs. But we're in a place where if we do this properly, if we make sure we are making the absolute best use of things like storage, of flexible demand, we can have a system that is more affordable for customers, accepting that in some areas there will be big needs for investment. So the simple picture of what we're trying to create is something that says, let's be as efficient as possible, let's be as effective as possible, but we accept there is a need to make sure we invest to get to net zero. And one last thing I'd say on that is part of that is taking some risk. I talked about the risk of offshore wind. Well, we do need to consider investing early in the networks to make sure we can anticipate the demand that is coming. And in our recent consultation, which I accept is a heavy tone, we have asked Peter and his colleagues and everyone involved to help us think through the methodology for that. So how do we make that robust? How do we make that economically robust so we as a regulator can stand behind some of the investment decisions we unlock over time? And then finally, the last couple of things I really want to refer to, one is innovation. And, I had the pleasure when I was able to sort of travel around the country more than now of coming to see ENW's Smart Streets initiative and a really imaginative sort of way of thinking about how you save customers money in a different way by running your network differently. Now, there is no doubt in my mind and no doubt in my board's mind, we are going to need significant innovation to get us to net zero. And what we've said is as well as having a funding stream which is about incremental improvement and efficiency improvements, we want to launch what is in effect a strategic innovation fund. And this is where we want to focus regulatory funding on innovation projects that are going to make a step change in that transition that I've just described. Now, I think it was the previous speaker who spoke, it was Angela who spoke about hydrogen. There's no doubt in my mind, if we're going to get hydrogen away, there are some big innovation projects we need across the board, actually. But where Ofgem really has its kind of locus, which is on the networks, we are going to need innovation and to understand how those networks can evolve to carry hydrogen, what the safety case might be, and we accept that that may well be at large scale. So again, if we have the right regulatory underpinning, if we have confidence from customers that their money is being used efficiently, confidence that the value between investors and customers is a fair balance, then I do think we have strong support to make sure we have the investment we need to get to where we want to. And the last thing I'd say is just really to return to those customers themselves, because we talk a lot about this in terms of cost. But work we have done and work we've seen from others shows there is a lot more we have to do to have a different kind of public debate so that we can talk more richly about the electric vehicle transition, more richly about what might happen to our heating systems, and more richly about the way our local environment might change as a result of this. And I don't underestimate at all the strength of feeling you're going to find when people have those conversations, the way in which different groups are going to want to interact with that. And we're beginning to see that, for example, in our offshore regime. So I think that cannot happen without strong local involvement. I think that cannot happen without a decent conversation between the regulator and local leaders, and that cannot happen without significant consultation at a local level about what we want. And all I'd say is we see that as fundamental to our job, not just in networks, but across the board. And we'd love it to have more detailed and more compelling conversations about that across the country. And I would love to, at some point, visit everybody in person again, so we're not doing this all through a screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and a real privilege to have you with us. I think it sends a strong message about your interest in these issues for you to take the time to be with us. So you've certainly, I think, reassured many of us who are passionate about decarbonisation and the role of place that you get it. And I think that's something that perhaps not every economic regulator can say. So it's not that we have a league table of favourite regulators, but I can only assume that you would be, if we did, be very near the top end. So
send me an email afterwards and just let me know where the ranking is.
Yeah, no, of course, yeah, no. I mean, it's obviously it's highly. It all relays on some quite complex data points, as all your metrics do as well. So it's a blended matrix model. So very quickly, I'm going to ask Paul Bircham from Electricity Northwest to do the kind of the closing remarks. We are obviously late, as every conference I seem to chair is late, so I don't get asked to do this very often for that reason. So apologies to colleagues at Devo Connect who this is not the fault of. But Paul, can you send us away mobilised and energised at what can be achieved in the Northwest, and then we'll let people go to their lunches.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Yeah, thanks, Henry. I will do my best. Very quickly, it's clear that this is a critical time for us all, a critical time for the country, and we face some enormous challenges. And therefore, it's critical for Electricity Northwest to demonstrate its determination in getting this right and playing a leading role in leading the way to net zero in the Northwest. And today has been helping us to get a really good understanding of all of the challenges and how they interact. And we're going to use all of this information and all of this dialogue to build the best business plan that we possibly can for the future period that we'll debate with Jonathan and make sure that that enables us to plan for and deliver what the Northwest needs to meet its decarbonisation needs. We want to keep the dialogue open with everybody and continue to engage with you. We want as much input into this business plan as possible. And I think this event has shown how much interest there is and how possible that can be, and how rich our business plan will be with all of these different inputs. So I want to thank you all for your engagement so far. I want to thank all of our speakers for their fantastic and insightful contributions. And then we'll work together with you going forward in partnership to build a great plan that really meets the needs of the Northwest. And I just very quickly pass on to Peter for any final thanks and comments.
Thanks, Paul. Now I'll give you very brief. It's been a really interesting morning. I've been quite struck actually by there's an awful lot of agreement on where we're heading, and I've been working with Jonathan for quite some time on painting a picture about the Northwest, and particularly the combined authorities area and our own aspirations, and we're working quite closely to strengthen that understanding. So I'd like to thank everyone for the contributions today. We'll be in touch with many of you because there's a lot of expertise and we need your input. So thanks for what's been a really interesting morning, and thank you for your time. It's really much appreciated.
Thank you all, and thank you particularly to Peter and to Jill and all of those who've been involved in putting together today. And I do hope you found today's session really positive, particularly Jonathan's speech, which I know many of you will have been hanging on, and I'm sure many in the industry beyond the Northwest will pour over, as these things always are, because I think this is a really critical time for decarbonisation. It isn't just government that has a role to play. Industry and our regulators have a key pivotal role, particularly in making sure that the transition is a just one and one that benefits communities as much as possible and plays that wider economic role that we know we need to if we're going to rebalance the economy and close that north-south divide to benefit people who live in the Northwest. So thank you everyone, have a great day, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.